Good morning. It is 10:10.
Hang on one second.
Oh,
I'm looking to see if it's live yet.
When you say live, I go.
You were ready.
Hang on.
I'm trained.
So I'll have
I'm
the
a trained live person.
cue you. Okay, we are live now.
Okay. Good
I'll
morning.
Get a director snap.
It's 10:10 a.m. and I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Finance Auditing Committee of Thursday, July 21st, 2022. Before we begin, please note this meeting is live streamed on YouTube and recorded. Members of the public are encouraged to watch or listen to the meeting on YouTube or by dialing into 415-569-6446. And I'll repeat that again in a minute, but that's the audio of this meeting. If you'd like to provide public comment at today's meeting and have not already done so, please call, and it's the same number, 415-569-6446, and let the facilitator know what items you would like to speak on today. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. Starting with Director Cochran.
Here.
Director Giudice. Didn't make it. Director Grosboll is absent. Director Hernandez.
Here.
Director Maston.
Here.
Vice Chair Parr.
Present.
Chair Rabbit is absent, and President Terrio is absent. So also on the line, we have Directors Garbarino and Hill. Rodoni is no longer with us, and neither is Snyder. So if you wouldn't mind promoting Directors Garbarino and Hill to be pro temp members, that would be helpful, and then we can complete our Finance Committee.
Absolutely. Let the record show that that Director Hill and Director Garbarino have joined the committee officially.
Great. Thank you. Then we'll move on to staff. Dennis Mulligan's on the line.
Present.
Joe Wire.
Yes.
Ava Barr-Furbush.
Present.
Kim Manolius.
Aye.
Madeline Chun.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dave Rivera.
Good morning, President.
Mona Babauta.
Present.
Jim Swindler. Jim Swindler, I see. Kelly Hopper.
Good morning.
Thank you. And also on the line, we have Ron Downing.
Good morning.
Amy Fry.
Morning.
And Kelly Vitale. Thank you. Let's see. All right. That confirms everyone on the line.
All right, thank you. I'd like to remind everyone again to mute their microphones until after the staff presentations. And remember to unmute when we open up for director discussion. If we have directors joining us by phone, as usual, the mute button is use your mute button or *6 to unmute yourself. And after the staff's presentation, I'll be asking for any questions or comments. You can click on reactions and raised hand on your device if you have a question, or press *9 for the raised hand function if you're joining by phone. If there are any questions, the secretary or I will call on you accordingly, and please speak up if we've missed your raised hand. After our discussion, we'll ask for any public comment before moving on. And Amaret, I assume you'll remind me if I move on too quickly. Please follow along by referring to the page numbers located on the bottom right-hand corner of your meeting packet. Madam Secretary, please introduce the first item.
Thank you, Vice Chair Parr. Item 3 is the ratification of previous actions by the Auditor Controller, and that packet of commitments, ratification, investments before you and begins on page 5. Wale Kajopai was introduced at our meeting last month and is now providing our PFM monthly updates now that Leslie Murphy has moved on. Wale's here with us to go over PFM's investment report for June 2022, and that begins on page 9, and I will be showing it on the screen. So Wale, I'm going to turn things over to you to begin your presentation.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Wale.
Good morning. Good morning. We'll start with the presentation on page 10 to do an overview of the portfolio and market updates from the end of June 30th. So if we go to page 10, this gives us an idea of what happened with the yield curve Amaret, can you move to page 10, please? Perfect. So if we look at what happened with the yield curve between the end of May and the end of June, we can see that the yield curve did shift upward, with most of the changes happening on the upper end, on the shorter end of the curve near that 3-month to 2-year area. Now yields did come down from their peaks. I think 2-year got to about 3.35%, and it's now hovering around 3% right now, currently. But that spike in yields did have a negative impact on the current bond holdings in the portfolio. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that yields do increase. It does give PFM an opportunity to select and to buy higher yielding securities as we move from this low interest rate environment that we were in for the last 2 years. We now do have some higher yielding securities in the portfolio that we'll go over later in the presentation. We move on to page 11. The hot topic again, what is driving interest rates higher and higher is the Fed's attempt to try to curb inflation. At the end of June, the CPI reading was at 8.6%. And the most recent number that we got was at 9.1. So we do continue to anticipate that the Fed will continue to raise rates. They do have a meeting next week where they will make a decision on what increase they will make with rates. The last rate increase we saw was 75 basis points, and that's something that we have not seen since 1994. We move through the presentation and move down to page 14. These are areas in the market where PFM is looking to add value to the portfolio. And the main area where we saw spreads move higher, if you compare those spreads or those yields to treasuries, was in the corporate sector. So again, we're very selective in looking at opportunities in that area to add, again, higher yielding securities to the portfolio. We move on to page 15. The Fed has made some revisions to their growth expectations. So they've lowered their GDP expectations moving forward. Also have increased their unemployment and PCE inflation targets, just based on some of the data that they're seeing from their most recent meeting, which has moved them to anticipate that the Fed funds rate will need to shift a little bit higher than they anticipated. When we look at the portfolio activity in page 16, the portfolio again continues to be well diversified with a mixture of treasuries, federal agencies, CDs, corporate notes, munis, and supernationals, along with LAIF and CAMP balances. And if you look at the 2 purchases that were made in the portfolio this last month, we do see treasuries yielding 3%. That's something we have not seen in quite some time. And then we also have a corporate note. We were able to purchase a high quality corporate note that is yielding 4%. So again, this will help the portfolio generate more income as we move towards the future. And then when we look at our outlook moving forward, again, we're being very selective of where we are adding value to the portfolio. There are some talks about potential recession. So again, that does make us very, very selective of where we're choosing where to add to the portfolio again. But again, this rising interest rate environment with high inflation is something that we're continually monitoring and doing our best to navigate through these current waters and market environment. And that is it for me for the presentation.
Thank you, Wale, for your presentation, and welcome again. Are there any questions or comments or concerns on item 3? Hearing none, Madam Secretary, would you, this concludes the discussion on this item, but before we take our vote, Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item 3?
We have no speakers for this item.
All right, thank you. In that case, I'll ask my colleagues for a motion on item 3.
Move to accept as presented.
Thank you, Jim. May I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right, thank you. Madam Secretary, we have a motion and a second. Would you please conduct a roll call vote?
Thank you. We have first and second on item number 3, and I'm going to start with Director Cochran,
Yes.
Thank you. Director Giudice is absent. Director Grosball is absent. I'll circle back. Director Garbarino.
Aye.
Thank you. Director
Aye.
Hill. Director Hernandez.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Hill.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Maston.
Aye.
Vice Chair Parr.
Aye.
And Chair Rabbit is absent and President Terrio is absent. So including our pro tem members, we have 6 ayes.
And that passes. Thank you very much. We have no budget adjustments or transfers this month, so we'll move on to item 5A to authorize filing an application with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission for fiscal year 22-23 Transportation Development Act State Transit Assistant and Regional Measure 2 operating funds, that's a mouthful, to support bus, ferry, and paratransit services. The staff report begins on page 25, and Amy Fry will present this report. Good morning, Amy. Please begin.
Good morning, Vice Chair Parr and directors. For your consideration, the item before you would authorize the general manager to claim nearly $28 million in TDA, STA, and RM2 operating funds. This item also authorizes the general manager to file revisions to the district's application if funding amounts change. Revenues are approaching pre-pandemic levels, and this year's claim totals 95% of the district's FY20 claim. The district has agreed to a fund swap in which $5.4 million in state operating grant funds from STA would go to MTC's Blue Ribbon Transit Transformation Action Plan account in exchange for $5.4 million in federal operating grant funds from the American Rescue Plan, or ARP, that MTC allocated to the district last October. The fund exchange that MTC and operators agreed to last year allowed the district and other Bay Area operators to apply for additional federal assistance. And in March, FTA awarded the district $75 million in these additional ARP funds. So to summarize, staff requests that the Finance Committee recommend that the board authorize the district to file an application for state operating funds and revisions as needed. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Amy. Are there any questions on this item? All right, seeing none, is it true that I don't see any hands up? That concludes the discussion on this item. Before we take our vote, Amaret, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item 5A?
We have no speakers for item 5A.
All right, thank you. In that case, do I hear a motion on 5A?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director Hernandez. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I didn't get who that was, but
Yes.
oh, thank you, Director Maston. So we have a motion and a second. Madam Secretary, would you please conduct a roll call vote?
Thank you. We are voting on item number 5A, starting with Director Cochran.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll jump to Director Garbarino.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Director Giudice is absent. Director Grosball is absent. Director Hernandez.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Hill.
Yes.
Director Maston.
Aye.
Vice Chair Parr.
Aye.
Thank you. And Chair Rabbit and President Terrio are absent, so you have 6 ayes.
Thank you. That motion passes. We'll move on to item 6 to approve the establishment of an educational institutional Clipper Pass on Golden Gate Transit Bus and Golden Gate Ferry through a pilot program and amend the master ordinance. The staff report begins on page 27, and Ron is with us again. Hello again, Ron, and you'll present this report. Please begin.
Good morning, Director Parr, members of the committee. This is the continuation of a process that we started in June in anticipation of this new fare program being available on August 8th. The item calls for the establishment of an educational institutional pass that's only available on the Clipper card through a pilot program. And the master ordinance requires us to go through a public process to establish any new fare. And if approved by the board, the master ordinance would be amended to reflect this new fare in our fare tables. We had a public hearing on June 23rd and went through our usual public outreach process. We received 2 public comments on the proposal. One was in support of the proposal and one was not related to the specifics of the proposal. This item before you today comes out of the fare coordination integration efforts that are the first activities that are beginning to roll out under the region's transit coordination efforts with MTC and the transit operators. And such, it is a regional program. We are not dictating the terms and conditions of the program, but they would like us to participate in it. The first phase that becomes live on August 8th is for major educational institutions, including UC Berkeley, Santa Rosa Junior College, San Francisco State University, and San Jose State University, and 3 affordable housing complexes in the Mid-Peninsula area in the Menlo Park, Palo Alto area. The program is designed to test the utility of a transit pass that can be used across multiple transit operators to see how the public reacts to having this fare media, if there's an increase in transit usage, if there's more transit usage by people who are issued these cards through their respective institutions. It's a 1-year pilot program, again, to see how this might work for future fare integration and coordination efforts in the future. The first phase of the project will be at no cost to the institutions nor the participants who attend those institutions. So it's an entirely just let's see what happens with this pass. We have been allocated $80,000 by MTC as a way to make us whole, depending on what kind of usage we get with this pass. The usage will be tracked by MTC through the Clipper card transaction records. And if we have more usage than the $80,000, MTC will return and make us whole for that amount. The second phase will be targeted to major employers in the core areas of San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose. And that part of the program will be a fee-based pass, and the employers and or the employees will pay for that availability of that Clipper pass. If the program ultimately becomes free, the pass will be a sold item, a vended item to all of the participants, and not offered to free for all of the institutions participating. Obviously, we're just at the beginning of a 2-year process, so none of those parameters have been set yet for future phases, and they will be informed by whatever data we get in the first phase and second phase of the project. The project will be managed jointly by MTC and BART under the combined oversight of the Fare Integration Task Force, and we will be part of that evaluation process as it moves forward. So again, there's a regional effort. MTC has actually allocated $85 million for transit transformation activities coming out of the Blue Ribbon Task Force. And of that, there's $28 million going to the transit agencies for various specific fare integration activities. About $6 million of that is going to this program. They expect obviously much heavier usage for a campus like UC Berkeley or San Francisco State. But again, everything is an estimate right now. So we'll keep you appraised of this as it moves forward. There are 1.5 staff full-time equivalents associated with this program at MTC and BART. And as I said, the program is expected to start in its first phase on August 8th and continue for 2 years. So that's the main reason they were establishing this as a fare in our master ordinance at this time. Title VI activities will come later because of the duration of the pilot program and are being coordinated by MTC with FTA. And at such point that this program becomes a permanent feature, we will bring a Title VI analysis back to the board for consideration. So again, we received 2 public comments for this proposal. The parameters have been set by a regional fare coordination board, And the item before you today is requesting approval of the establishment of this fair and amending the master ordinance accordingly. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ron. Are there any questions for item 6 from the directors? Ron, I have a question, please. I'm excited about this, of course, partly because of the educational institutions, but on page 28, it says the pilot program will be structured in 2 phases. And phase 1 also includes affordable housing properties. And the affordable housing properties part of it doesn't appear in our resolution or our agenda item. It doesn't appear under the recommendation. Is that a sin of omission or a sin of commission?
Director Parr, those are affordable housing properties in Menlo Park, Palo Alto. And those are low-income housing properties. The travel would be mostly local for those residents who receive the passes. And as such, we don't expect travel from Menlo Park to touch our Golden Gate system on a regular basis.
That having been said, though, the pass works on all 27 transit agencies in the Bay Area. So if someone that lived in that low-income housing that had these free passes would be able to ride Golden Gate bus and Golden Gate ferry at no cost. So we don't anticipate a lot of usage, but they're entitled to go any place throughout the region. And that's one of the things we'll learn when we make transit more affordable and easier. Do folks that reside in low-income housing and students take advantage of it and travel more and enjoy more mobility in the region?
Thank you for that. I assume that along our corridor, we have low-income housing. Are the ones in Marin and Sonoma County not included then?
That's correct.
This is a pilot, and so there's a finite amount of money, so they chose to limit it. There's a lot more than 4 public, universities. There's
Right.
Junior College, San Francisco City College. There's several in Contra Costa County and Alameda County. So they try to pick institutions that were geographically spread throughout the Bay Area. That's why they picked Santa Rosa Community College. They picked SF State, San Jose State, and Berkeley, was to do North Bay, San Francisco, South Bay, East Bay, and then they want to try a housing component. But this is a pilot, so it's just to gather data on a very, very small subset. So almost all universities were left out and almost all affordable housing was left out. But this is just to gather data, and then the results of this will inform us as a region going forward. How do we want to roll out a broad program that would apply to all low-income housing and potentially all public universities and colleges in the Bay Area?
All right, thank you for that. That gives me hope. Any other questions? Comments? All right.
Director Hill has a question.
I'm sorry, Director Hill.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't use my hand. As someone who is dependent on active transportation, I can say that I'm very, very, very excited about this. This is the first step of what we'll integrate so that people don't have to tackle with all the different rules and everything else to go from one point to the other. And in the end, this could really be a game changer for transportation in the Bay Area. I'm just so excited about this. So I'd like to support this amendment.
All right, as soon as we take public comment, we'll let you make the motion. How's that?
Okay, thank you.
All right. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on item 6?
We do. We have one speaker. Mr. Pelpel would like to speak on this item. David, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
We can
We
hear you.
can.
Go ahead.
Great. As I've said the last 2 months, I think, on this item, I support the proposed pilot program. I am excited. I'm very excited. I'm not sure that I'm very, very excited or anyway, this is a good idea. Let's gather the data, all of what staff just said. I did have some minor wording issues on the ordinance. See, the good news is that you've got the draft ordinance in the packet. The bad news is then I get to look at it and wordsmith it. So there are a couple of references to BART that just say Bay Area Rapid Transit. Perhaps it would be more clear to refer to them as the Bay Area Rapid Transit District. And that's on page 31. And 33, perhaps also on 34. No, I don't see it on 34. And then in particular on 33, section 1 of the ordinance after the findings, I think that perhaps should say the district's master ordinance is amended as follows, because section 1 actually would amend the master ordinance, and it doesn't clearly say that. And just finally, also on page 33, under item E there, that graph refers to the Bay Area Integration Task Force, and I think it's the Bay Area Fair Integration Task Force. Anyway, I'm happy to communicate those specifics to Amrit after the meeting, and perhaps those minor adjustments can be incorporated this afternoon prior to board action tomorrow. Anyway, did I mention that I'm supportive of this pilot program? Thanks very much for listening.
Yes, you did. Thank you again, David. All right, any other public comments, Amrit?
We have no other speakers.
All right, in that case, may I have a motion for this? And I am going to recognize that, thank you, Bert, that Director Hill offered that. All right, Director Hill, you can be the motion maker. Is there a second, please?
I'll second it.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Madam Secretary, would you please conduct a roll call vote?
Thank you. We're voting on item number 6, and we'll start with Director Cochran,
Yes.
Director Garbarino,
Yes.
Director
Yeah.
Giudice is absent, Director Grosval is absent, Director Hernandez.
Aye.
Aye. Director Hill,
Yes.
Director Maston,
Enthusiastic aye.
Vice Chair Parr.
Aye.
Thank you. And Chair Rabbit and President Terrio are absent, so you have 6 ayes.
All right, thank you. That motion passes. Next on the agenda is item number 7, the status report on the fiscal year 21-22 budget. The staff report was sent to directors and posted on the web yesterday morning, along with reports for agenda items 8, 9A, and 9B. Joe Wire will be presenting this item. Joe, go ahead with your report, please.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and to the committee. As mentioned, we are deviating from the actual packet and back to a separate email that had those items on it, or also you can pull them down off our website.
Do we need to take a minute and let people find it?
I would be happy to do that.
All right.
I can start talking
All
a
right,
little
why
bit
don't
of
you-
introduction,
sure, go ahead and
and then
start.
while people are doing that, and if you do pull them off the website, they'll be listed as items 7, 8, and 9A and 9B, and we will be, of course, taking them all in order. The first one is the status report on the budget, which is on the fiscal year 21-22 budget, which just ended June 30th. The reason these reports were mailed out is your meeting this year in June happened on the 21st, which is very close to our year-end close date, and so these reports were not ready for the mail out, but staff did scramble to get them together to get them out for this meeting. It's important because it gives you a sense of the entire year. The previous 12 months, as you know, usually we just have a partial year. Now we get the whole thing. As we know, the status report was set up as we entered into the COVID era to be able to explain and to follow the progress of the budget explicitly, to make sure that we were able to balance the budget with federal funds that then started coming in over a year and a half ago. And as mentioned earlier by Amy Fry, we have received a significant amount of resources because of the district's need for those resources. We've been able to balance these budgets, and this one is the same. We will be using federal funds to balance this budget. If we turn down 2 pages, there's the first page, and the next one's intentionally left blank, and then you get attachment A. Attachment A, as you'll be familiar with, is just a spreadsheet that shows what resources we have, what changes have occurred from when we brought the original budget to you 12 months ago that said that it would have a almost $75 million deficit. That number is up in the far right-hand corner of that spreadsheet. and now a PDF document. It says 74,600,000. So that was the original estimate of the deficit. And then as we go down the lines, we have either resources that have come in or expenses that did not occur that enable us to settle out that deficit down to zero, which appears at the bottom right-hand corner of the spreadsheet. So that just shows that the necessary changes were made in order to balance the budget. And we'll take a quick look at those. The first one was the use of the first tranche of MTC revenue we got from the federal government on the ARP law, and that was $57,700,000. That reduces the deficit enormously because that's extra revenue that came in. Then we used a little bit, just a teeny bit of tranche 2, and that's another $17,000. And then what occurs next is the fact that we did not use some of the toll revenue that we earned this year because we were able to charge expenses in the transit divisions to the ARP grant. Those toll revenues will go into your district reserves to be used in a future year for transit purposes or other purposes as the board chooses. And that was that's going to be approximately $19.7 million, we believe. Then the next line 4, was TDA, STA grant funding that came in larger than we expected this year. And so that's an added $3.4 million. Reduces that deficit. The tolls this year, which we'll discuss later in the next item, were greater than we had budgeted by $15 million. The next line 6, is operating revenues. Other operating revenues, so not counting tolls or fares, but all the rest, they were actually less than we expected. And that was due to the rising interest rates that Wale pointed out to you earlier. We're all aware they've gone up. And what they do to the district is, as far as the district portfolio is concerned, we earn more, but when we are forced to price all our bonds at the end of the fiscal year and put it on the spreadsheet on our financials, the price of the bonds actually drops. Rising interest rates drops the value of your bonds. However, it won't affect the resources the district gets out of its portfolio because we aren't selling those bonds for the lower prices. We are waiting to bring in the higher revenues that we will earn off their interest rates. So it has a paper effect, but not a actual effect. But we do have to show it on our financials. And then line 7, changes in operating expenses. Those are the reduction in expected expenses. So the budget had approximately $23 million more in expenses than we actually spent. And that was almost entirely due to the fact that the budget made some aspirational assumptions that we would be able to increase our transit service because our ridership would come back. And of course, as you all know, that did not happen. And we will talk to that. So the fact that the ridership, the demand by our customers did not grow. So therefore the district did not expend the resources because the demand was not there. And then overall that leads to a 0 at the bottom, which is saying that the budget was balanced. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, we would go back to you, Madam Vice Chair.
All right, thank you. Are there board members that have questions for Joe?
Yes, Director Maston has a question.
Certainly, go ahead.
Let me get back to okay. So on line 3, Joe, the estimated toll revenue carryover, if that comes in under what we expect, would the difference be made up from out of the second tranche money that we didn't use, or do you have some other plan for that?
It won't drive the other numbers drive it. So in other words, it's the resulting amount. We have certain amount of expenses, a certain amount of revenue that we need, and then the leftover. So there was another way to say this: the extra revenue would be that toll carrier. The only reason since it's the resulting number, the way it will change, it won't change because we need more revenue. It will change because our expenses end up less than what I've got projected right here on the page. We have, in fact, at the end of the fiscal year, we have two operations. We have a first close, which is trying to do all the normal revenues and expenses that you would do, that you would necessarily do to close out your books for the year. And then we have what we call as a second close, which occurs in the next couple of weeks and actually can stretch out over a period of time. And it's the accounting adjustments that come in. Those are tend to be GASB requirements. They are usually non-cash items, and they can make on paper things look like we had more revenue or less expenses, but that's not actually cash in the bank, which is what we're trying to show here, because that's what, of course, you folks need to run the organizations to cash in the bank. If GASB can tell you that your expenses were $10 million less because of some change in future liabilities, that doesn't buy anything today. It might in the future, but it doesn't today. But we have to show it today because of the rules. So we try not to show those in this. We just try to show the cash amounts on that thing. So I think when you see this number again, it says 19 million now. You're right. It may look different, but that would be driven most likely by non-cash items rather than by some change in the revenues or some need to use more ARP revenues or something of that nature.
If that's the case, is toll revenue an accurate description for that line?
Yes, it is the only. It is our the way the district runs its finances. It's the last revenue standing. Put it that way. All the other revenues have called on first. So when transit is operating, for example, if it gets if you get any bus fares, the district applies its bus fares to transit. To bus transit, a first dollar, like that goes right away. A grant that comes from the county Marin to run transit, like a ST80 or STA, that's second dollar right to transit, doesn't go anywhere else. So when it comes to bridge tolls, of course, they go to bridge expenses first. But if there's leftover after bridge expenses, which is these bridge toll revenues, then they wait and they go to bus and ferry as needed. So if for some reason bus and ferry were to have enough of their own revenues, like fares or grants or other things or contract revenue, and less toll revenue was needed, then we would those bridge toll revenues would go into district reserves. They're not fighting necessarily to be spent on operating. In fact, they are essential for you to pay your share of capital projects as you go forward. So they go into district reserve for that purpose. Because we have these unique federal one-time funding, it's created sort of a new ripple to this. Usually, the backstop of last resort for transit has always been bridge tolls. It's been that way since the early 1970s when we started transit. They backstop the last dollar. If we don't have enough. If bridge and ferry don't have enough of their own revenues, they get it from the tolls. In this particular case, they have two backstops in a way. They're getting revenue from the federal one-time funding first, and then they get the last bit they need from tolls. In this case, there was enough federal one-time funding that all this toll revenue wasn't needed, and so that's why it's showing up there as extra revenue, but it's really revenue that's going into reserves that can be used for this purpose. Either funding transit or capital projects in some future year.
May I clarify, it's not needed this year.
Yes.
The current path, it will be needed in the future year.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
And we have in the budget in the second chapter of the budget on the overview, there's a graph that sort of shows you all of the district's available resources it has, and then there's another graph on the next page which shows you how quickly we allocate those resources. So even though we're putting money in reserves, of course, that reserve, as Dennis mentioned, is being spoken for by the future projects, or in this case, it could be spoken for if by future operating needs if business does not return and the remaining federal one-time funding is exhausted.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for the question, Director Maston. And I feel like we just had a review of Bridge Finance 101, and I think that's probably healthy. I think we need to have that every once in a while. Are there any other comments or questions? All right, hearing none, that concludes the discussion on the item. Amarette, is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak on this item?
Yes, we do. We have one member of the public wishing to speak, and that's Mr. Pilpel. He'd like to speak on
Right.
this one. David, are you there?
Yes.
We
And this is it for me. I am not planning to say anything else today to any of you, maybe more tomorrow. So once again, good, prudent management of resources, deferring the use of the ARP second and third tranche to next year and hopefully thereafter. And just to repeat my broken record, I still think we need a new strategic financial plan. The sooner the better before the fiscal cliff hits. There are some important and difficult decisions ahead for this board. And I look forward to those discussions in public in advance. That's all for me for today. Thanks again for listening.
All right.
We have no further speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking to see if that requires it doesn't require a vote, does it? All right, then on to number 8. Number 8 is the monthly review of Golden Gate Bridge traffic tolls, bus and ferry transit patronage fares. As I mentioned, the staff report for this item, as well as 9A, the monthly statement of revenue and expenses, and 9B, the monthly statement of capital programs and expenditures, were sent yesterday. All right, Joe, you're on again.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and to the board, to the committee. We have item 8, which is should be familiar. Again, we'll take a little more time with this because it wraps up the entire year. Ideally, it would be good to stick with the table, which is actually the 3rd page of this packet. There's the first page, and there's a blank page, and then you have the 3rd page. It's a table that's in landscape. We've changed it slightly, hopefully to make it a little easier to read. You can see it has bridge, bus, and ferry written up on the right hand, on the left-hand side. We're going to look at the top box, which is bridge. The traffic is on the left-hand side, and the revenues on the right-hand side. And since we're at the Finance Committee meeting and not the Transportation Committee meeting, we're going to be looking at the right-hand side, which is the toll revenue side. What that box does is it shows month by month all of the revenue coming in through the toll system, and in a grand total by month. The middle column of that box, there's 5 columns in there, is the actual revenue for this year, FY 21-22. You can see the bold number at the bottom, $132 million. That was how much revenue we brought in this year from the toll system. It's approximately a 13% increase. That's the farthest right-hand column. 13% increase of the year over what we had budgeted. And it's a 21% increase over what we had last year. Both obviously very good things. It's good that we grew from last year significantly, and it's good that it's over what we even budgeted. So that's important and good news for the district. You can see we still have seasonality, which we always have. You can see the numbers are larger in the summertime months and they're smaller in the wintertime months. And that's not uncommon. They're a little bit smaller than we expected. And then we did have, if you remember, a little bit of a bump up in COVID over the January, February period, I think it was, if I remember correctly. That kind of dropped our numbers a little bit during that time period. But also you can see we're rebounding this summer a little bit higher than last summer. And that also looks good. Of course, we did starting July 1, we do have higher toll price also, and that will bring in more revenue too, even with the constant, if the traffic pattern stays relatively constant. So that's good news. Then the next box down is bus revenue for revenue on the right-hand side again, just like we were looking at with the bridge. In this case, bus revenue was approximately $5.5 million. It's a significant increase over last year, which was just under $3 million. So an 85% increase. It is less than we had budgeted. In other words, less than we had thought. We were hoping for a slightly larger rebound on bus traffic up to about $6.5 million. And that did not occur. So we had about $5.5 million. So it was a 17% less than budgeted. And then on the bottom is ferry revenue. Ferry revenue was sort of opposite of what happened to bus. It also grew substantially, about sevenfold over the previous year. So we definitely had riders returning to the ferry system. It's a 20% increase over what we even budgeted. From that, it's approximately $6.7 million. And you can see it's even larger than our bus system, although it does carry approximately 300,000 less people in last year. Because of the higher ticket prices, those people contributed more revenue back into the district. So again, significant increases. So from a year on year, this is what this table does. It looks at 1 year and then the next year. Relatively good news, absolutely good news from what we'd seen earlier in the COVID crisis. Unfortunately, as you guys also are aware, this isn't where we used to be on any of these three boxes. And then if we can skip down 6 pages, which are the graphs that discuss the data we just talked about, we get down 6 pages, we'll get to the charts, the graphs that show you the 4 years pre-COVID, and then which is 19, and then 20 and 21 and 22 now. So they give you a picture of where we are today compared to where we used to be. The first page is bridge. The first graph at the top of that page is traffic, and then the second graph on that page is revenue. If you look at bridge revenue, the gold line, if you're looking at this online, or the line that only goes halfway across the page, is 22 revenue, and you can see it's pretty close to where we were back in pre-COVID, because we're running, on average about 80 to 85% of where we used to be, but it's not where we were, and it's significantly greater than where we used to be during COVID. So it's gone up, but we're not quite where we are, which is what we expect when we looked at the raw numbers earlier. If you go down a little farther down the page and then turn to the following page, you get bus revenue. That's where you can see that the 22 graph, the line for 22 is significantly lower still than where we were pre-COVID. It's running higher than the 2 COVID years, 20 and 21. In some cases significantly higher, double even, but it's still 40% of where we used to be with bus ridership. And Dennis talked to that earlier, that we just don't have the commute ridership that we had at one time.
Excuse me, Amrit, could we please scroll down a couple more pages towards the 3?
Yep, there you go.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have to look back and forth. I apologize. Didn't notice I'd gotten ahead of the page. So that's bridge. The middle graph that you see on your page is bridge revenue, and you can see the yellow line is halfway across, which is revenue up only it's near the blue line, which is from last year. And if you go down then, Amrit, to the next page, you get bus revenue is the top graph, and bus this year's number is the yellow line that's going halfway across the page near the bottom. And you can see it's significantly lower than revenue than the bus revenue was pre-COVID, which is the top line, but it's above the 2 COVID years. And then the very bottom graph on this page is ferry revenue, and you can see the steep increase in ferry revenue. And that's what I was talking about earlier. It has significantly increased. It's obviously still below where it used to be at this time, but it's made significant inroads over where it was for the 2 COVID years, which was very, very low during these periods. So it's had a nice rebound. And with that, I would happen to have any questions on this report.
All right, thank you. Are there questions from directors on this particular item? I don't see any. Do you, Amrit?
I do not see any hands up.
All right. In that case, this concludes this item. Before we move on, Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item 9A or 9B?
I have no speakers for items 8, 9A, or 9B, but I believe, Joe, are you going to move into 9A now?
I will.
Okay.
I was going to ask him to do that as soon as we figured out. Oh, got it mixed up. That's all right. Go ahead, Joe.
Sure. So we'll
Thank
turn
you.
to item 9A. And that is the financials for both operating is 9A and capital is 9B. So in the first page of the report on the first page of 9A, you'll if you go halfway down the page, you'll get to the table, which shows the full years in comparison to the budget year and the prior year. We've sort of reinvented this table a little bit because of the unique nature of the district's finances this time. We needed to make it clear about how we use the emergency one-time funding and what the revenues and expenses look like without that emergency one-time funding. So in that table, the consolidated district revenues represent the revenues without one-time funding. That's the first line. And then if you look at the next line, you get to consolidated district expense. Then there's the non-cash year-end gap adjustments that I talked to you about, which every prior year we have to make these in the prior year for our financial statements. So we're adding them back in to make everything equal. It's just to make them all apples to apples rather than apples to oranges. So you get to subtotal, which is the fourth line down, which is called subtotal revenues over expenses. What that represents, those are large negative numbers. What they represent is the district's what is usually called a structural deficit. It means our operating revenues are less than our operating expenses by these amounts. So in the prior year, it was 59 million. The budget said it was going to be 74,600,000, which is not coincidentally the exact number we were talking about in the status report, and we showed how we balanced that. And in this current year, right now, through the first close, it was 37.9 or almost $40 million, $38 million. So that's not good news, but it's much better news than it was a year ago when it was $59 million. So things have gotten better. The district's revenues are higher than they were before from operations, and therefore we have reduced that structural deficit down to approximately $38 million. Which is very, very good news. Of course, we have $38 million to go to get to a point where we can get back to where we used to be prior to COVID in 2019, where we had a balanced operating budget and we knew that we could provide our services for what we ourselves could earn in our business, which is, of course, the model that we need to get back to eventually. We do have, fortunately, federal funding. And the fifth line, of course, is the federal funding that we used in those given years. Prior year, it was 67 million. This last year, 57 million. And it shows the very bottom line shows the consolidated revenues over expenses, which is what we're calling sort of total revenue carryover, money that we've carried over and we're going to put into the reserves for future use. And that's what those numbers represent, the 19 million you see, which we talked about earlier in our discussions earlier. So this is just essentially as an opportunity for us to show that the year was positive, very positive from the previous year. We're 2/3 of, we've cut our need for one-time funding by 1/3. We have 2/3 to go to get it down. Fortunately for the district, there is sufficient one-time federal funding for next year, as we discussed when we passed next year's budget, and we will have funding for the following year, one-time federal funding for the following year also, if we are able to manage our finances as we have effectively been doing it so far, which is, in other words, not spending resources that our customers aren't demanding, and therefore able to stretch out that one-time funding for at least a couple more years. If we can keep this rate of improvement, we would be in great shape. Of course, we can't predict that future, so we will be monitoring and talking about it and planning for more than one eventual future, so that we're ready regardless of what happens. So that's the summary. What follows are the normal financial pages. They have the consolidated financials, both revenues and expenses by line item for the consolidated district, and then pages after that, they have the data for each division. I won't be going into them in detail now, but I'm happy to answer any questions. The bottom line is that expenses were lower than we budgeted, and that was due to the drop in, well, not the drop, the fact that customer demand did not return. So therefore, the district salaries and benefits were lower. And the district's professional services and repair and supplies were lower because of that. We did not spend those resources than what we thought we would have. And operating revenues were higher, as I mentioned earlier, because toll revenue was higher. If there's any questions on B, why don't I move to 9B first, and then we'll come back and we take questions on 9A and B. I think we've been typically doing that.
Certainly.
So if we look at 9B, that's the same opportunities. It's our opportunity to summarize the capital budget for the end of the fiscal year. So 9B. In this report shows total expenditures for the year were approximately $40.7 million out of a $47.7 million budget, for about 85%. For the capital budgeting, that's excellent. That we expect to be in the 70 to 90% range because of the varied nature of how capital expenditures spend out. But that's what we'd like to do. And what it shows is that the district is building its budget realistically around what it's able to spend, and the project's able to deliver. So I think that's important. It gives both us as employees and the public and you as a board as an opportunity of sort of assuming that what we budget is about what we're going to be able to do. And that in the case in this year happened. The majority of these funds were spent out around the suicide deterrent project because of its sheer size. After that was work on repair and retrofit of ferry vessels. If you look at the spending, about 38% of this, or about $15.4 million, was district funds. Those are monies that the district took from operating earnings, like we discussed earlier, and put into the capital. Put into the reserves and then used for capital projects. So approximately $15.4 million was spent out of the reserves for these projects, and that was what was budgeted for the district to do so. And if there are any questions on this, on 9A or 9B, I'm happy to take them.
Do any of the directors have questions for Joe? Your reports are always comprehensive, Joe. You don't get many questions. All right. Thank you. There are no actions required for any of your items, but thank you for the information. So we'll continue to item 10, which is the fourth quarterly report of judgments or settled claims. The report can be found on page 37 of your packet, and I assume that Kelly Vitale will present this report. I don't see Kelly's picture, but are you there, Kelly?
I see her there.
Right, I see she's on the phone.
Yes.
All right, go ahead, Kelly. Welcome.
Kelly, you have to hit *6 to unmute.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Sorry about that. Good morning, directors. This item before you, item number 10, is just an informational item about the district's last quarter settlement. So I'll just ask if there's any questions about that.
All right, are there any questions for Kelly? In my opinion, this is always an interesting report. You all know that I love to see the compromise and release and the full releases. That means that it isn't an ongoing expense in the way it has been. So thank you again, Kelly. Are there other?
You are very welcome.
I'm going to interrupt just for a second,
Okay.
because I believe we do have someone on the line who wants to speak on item number 10 from the public.
All right.
And I'm going to double check that he's still on the line. Mr. Holden, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
There you go. Welcome, Mr. Holden. I believe you wanted to
Hi.
speak under item 10.
Hi. Yes, I did. Good morning, directors
Good morning.
and General Manager Mulligan. These numbers kind of cry out that there might be some issues in the bus division, and it's been my experience that most of these injury settlement issues can be mitigated by the deputy general managers if they're involved in the process. I don't think Kelly Hopper, Vitale, Mr. Mulligan, and Mr. Wire are really can help mitigate some of these settlements and some of these injuries. And so I was hoping that there could be some kind of synergy between operations of the different divisions and the risk management and administration, so we could try to mitigate some of these. These are just payouts. These are not injuries. These are not even reportable injuries. These are just settlements, and the numbers are startling. So that's my 2 cents as a bus operator, and hopefully, you know, we can get these numbers as directors in your oversight capacity to try to see what's going on here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Holden, for that comment. Are there other members from the public?
We have no other speakers.
No other speakers? All right, if there are no other comments from the directors, this concludes the discussion on this item. So moving on to items 11 and 12, the fourth quarterly report on authorized budget adjustments and budget transfers under the general manager's authority, as well as procurement actions. Item 11 starts on page 41, item 12 on page 47 of your packet. Joe, would you go ahead, please, and begin your report on these items?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, to the committee. Yes, as mentioned, because these reports do not involve the financial close, they were available for mail out. So they're in your packet, as mentioned, page 41. So we'll go back to the regular packet. The first one is the fourth quarter report of budget adjustments operating for the operating budget and the capital budget. We provide this each quarter. The only change this particular quarter was a budget adjustment item that was brought to the board that we're just reporting back to you here. So you've already seen it. It had to do with the, in this case, it had to do with the toll plaza elevator replacement repair. And that was brought to you. And then it was actually brought to you in the budget when you passed the budget. And so it's listed on the very end of this particular report. Overall, there were no operating budget adjustments for the year, and that is summarized on the last page of your report. And there were a handful of capital ones, but overall the impact was minimal, less than $1 million in a $285 million overall budget. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you again, Joe. Are there questions from directors on items 11 or 12? I don't see any hands. This concludes then the discussion on these items. No actions are required for these items. Before we move on, is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on 10, 11, or 12? Amrit, do you have anyone? No.
Sorry,
Okay.
I have no speakers for this item.
That's all right. As long as you nod your head, I'm good. Thank you. Then we'll continue to item 13 on the agenda, which is closed session. Before I do that, again, I want to thank everyone for their patience during our meetings. We'll be leaving the video meeting for the duration of our closed session item and return after closed session. Members of the public who wish to stay on the line or live stream may do so until our return. Attorney Kim Manolius will take us into closed session. Good morning, Kim. I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Chair Parr. At this time, the committee will go into closed session for a conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation under Government Code Section 54956.9A with regard to the two matters on the agenda, the Venturini matter and the Burt matter. We'll go into closed session now.
All right, thank you. Amrit, do you want to tell people what to do? We
Sure.
sign off and then you call in with your telephone.
Yeah,
right?
just a reminder to have directors, staff mute their microphones on the computers and turn off cameras if you decide to keep it on and logged in. Otherwise, we like to call into the phone number that we provided in the closed session report. Thank you.
So we'll start immediately, correct?
Yes, we're going in now.
And I'm sorry, we stay on this line, is that right?
You can leave this line and then jump into the other one since you're calling in by phone. And then
Okay,
call
and
back
the
in.
other one, I'm sorry, Amaret. The other one is,
I will text you. How's that?
Amaret, Director Cochran. Director Cochran, your picture is still on. There you go.
Is there anything happening?
Conference now, which is age, right? So this is kind of the iceberg of what we just talked about in prevent screening. So because his future medical care is estimated to be about $71,000, it will include surgery to the back and shoulder. So what we have to remember is that the future medical care estimates are
All right, I believe what we do now is, Mr. Manolius, would you please provide your closed session report?
Of course, Chair Parr, thanks. The committee met in closed session with legal counsel regarding two matters listed on the agenda, the Venturini matter and the Burt matter, and provided its counsel with appropriate guidance on how to proceed. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim. Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to address the committee under item 14, public comment?
We have no other speakers on the line.
All right. In that case, thank you very much, committee. It's been a long meeting. We've reached the end of the agenda. May I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So move, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I have a second already, I think. Hearing no objections, this concludes the meeting of the Finance Auditing Committee. Thank you so much, colleagues. The time is 11:29. Thank you again, Joe.
All right.